Hello, everyone. This is so great to see so many of you here. Thank you for being here and welcome to this webinar that is sponsored by the Maryland Online Leadership Institute. We are also known as MOLLI. Some of you may be familiar with that acronym. My name is Shinta Hernandez, and I am the MOLLI Director, and I'm also the founding dean of the virtual campus at Montgomery College in Montgomery County, Maryland. And from what I see on chat, we have participants from all over the place. So I am so pleased to see such great interest in this webinar, and really, truly thank you for choosing to spend this hour with us. Before we get started, I want to give you a brief history of the MOLLI professional development, because some of you may know and some of you may not. So MOLLI is undergoing a reimagination, and part of this change is to deliver a series of webinars and workshops that will help you enhance your knowledge and your leadership skills, specifically in online education. And we also wanted to deliver a professional development that's more focused and better aligned with the rapid changes that are happening in higher education. So the topics that we will be focusing on are really centered on the timeliest and the most relevant of areas, and all of this from a leadership lens. So this webinar today on January 31st is actually the first of a series of MOLLI webinars that we're calling Leadership Talk. And next month in February, we're going to host a series, the first one of a series of MOLLI workshops that's called Expert Insights. And I also want to share an exciting event that's happening at the end of June. This is going to be an in-person retreat held here in Maryland that's going to bring all of the most relevant topics together, and it'll provide participants with an opportunity to engage and to network with community leaders, with thought leaders and practitioners in online education leadership. And this event, this retreat, is really open to everybody. Just wanted to tell you that it's going to be here in the state of Maryland. So as you can see, there are a lot of exciting things that are happening with MOLLI just this year alone. And I do hope that you'll continue to join us as we learn and as we grow together. Now, before I introduce you to our presenter, I also want to share that toward the end of the webinar, there will be a post-webinar survey. So I will share that link and that QR code with you in the chat after the Q&A session. And then also later in the webinar, I'm going to share the MOLLI website that has the information on all of the webinars and workshops for this 2024 calendar year, as well as a certificate of completion that you can share with your institution to show your attendance. All right. Well, now I have the honor and pleasure of introducing to you our presenter, Dr. Michael Mills. Dr. Mills is the Vice President of E-Learning, Innovation, and Teaching Excellence at Montgomery College in Maryland, and is the board chair of Maryland Online, also known as MOL. And his presentation will focus on how we can lead and navigate the digital landscape and the intersection between artificial intelligence and online education. So really, without further ado, I will hand this over to Dr. Mike Mills.
Thanks, Shinta. Good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm just so looking forward to the conversation. I'm looking forward to the interaction that we can engage in. And if you have comments or questions, please post them in the chat. Shinta will monitor the chat, and we'll have time at the end for conversations. As Shinta said, we're going to talk about this intersectionality of online learning, this digital landscape, and certainly the artificial intelligence impact on that. But it's not just going to be about navigating it. We're going to finish up the conversation about how do you as leaders lead in this environment, because it's not an easy environment in which to demonstrate leadership. And we're going to get your viewpoints on that and talk a little bit about that, and hopefully at the end provide an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you may have, and we'll come to some collective conclusions. So a couple of things that we're going to focus on today. We're going to start off talking about educational disruptors. And we're going to go through a timeline of educational disruption. Some things you may not have thought about, some things you certainly are aware of, but may not have thought of them in terms of disruption. And then we're going to go into the AI conversation after we talk about the online education environment and what may lie ahead for that. We're going to focus on the most recent Quality Matters CLOE report that has come out, and talk a little bit about what that landscape looks like. And then we'll wrap up with a focus on how you as leaders can lead in this environment, in this space. So when we look at educational disruption, to me, there's not a whole lot of gray area with this. We either see educational disruption as good or we see it as bad. What I want to focus on as we get started is I want to get your viewpoints on educational disruption. So I've got a slide here, and if you can use your QR code scanner or go to slido.com and type in that code. In your viewpoint, is educational disruption good or bad? And you notice I'm not giving you an out here. I'm not letting you decide that, oh, maybe it is. I want to know if it's good or bad. Okay, mostly all good at this point. And anyone with any bads? Okay, so the point of this was, when we talk about educational disruption in the context of a good or bad, most of us will say it's good. So this does not surprise me. And yet, when we're in our day-to-day, we often lament the disruptions that occur. Right? So if we, and we're going to get into the disruptions, but if we take AI, for example, we might all say it's good, but when we have conversations with colleagues, we often look at AI as being a negative. It's being bad. It's creating this issue. So let's dive into a few of the educational disruptors. And what I've done here is just looked at higher education, going back to the Land Grant College Act, better known as the Morrill Act, that was passed in 1862. And this act made it possible for states to establish public colleges funded by the development or sale of associated federal land grants. All well and good, right? Except, where did those federal lands come from? About 10 million acres were expropriated from tribal lands of native communities. Okay, so the educational disruptor created wonderful universities all throughout this country, and yet it displaced a large number of Native Americans. The GI Bill, 1944, formerly known as the Servicemen's Readjustment Act, helped provide a number of benefits for returning World War II veterans. It's still used today, and we have a number of our current students who are going through the GI Bill. Wonderful opportunity for our students. But it created a disruption in higher education because it created a demand that many of our institutions were not able to meet. Now, the next one, 1965, the Higher Education Act. President Lyndon Johnson signed this act to strengthen the educational resources of our higher education institutions and to provide assistance for students in post-secondary school. Wonderful opportunity. Title IV of the Higher Education Act provided that financial assistance. Still very, very popular today. Title IV, as you know, helps drive most of our public institutions. The next one, the community college movement, starting around the 1960s, 1950s. We saw a proliferation of junior colleges, two-year community colleges that helped meet the growing workforce needs of our local communities, and then also served as an on-ramp to a number of our four-year schools. In 1972, Title IX, only 37 words long. If you look at Title IX, it's a very short entity in the legal community, but it prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school that receives federal funding. When Title IX first came out, the big focus was on sports, collegiate sports. And so you saw a proliferation of women's sports teams at colleges and universities. Now we know that Title IX has a much broader space, and we see Title IX in terms of providing resources for nursing mothers taking classes, for all kinds of anti-discrimination, sexual discrimination claims. So it has broadened its appeal for sure. In the 1990s, we saw this growth of distance learning and online degrees, starting somewhere in the late 90s when the web became more accessible. You saw a lot of these companies venture into the online community and the online space, providing educational access. Again, a huge disruptor, not necessarily bad. I think all of these are very good, but it was a disruptor in education. In the 2000s, and this certainly continues, the student loan crisis. To date, there's about almost $2 trillion in student loan debt. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of impact on a large number of individuals. And this is only United States, $2 trillion in the United States. And then finally, in 2020, COVID-19, the pandemic, a huge, huge disruptor for education. And this is one of those disruptors where I think has good and bad qualities for it. If you could, in the chat, just what were the good qualities that COVID-19 brought about in education, and what were the bad aspects of COVID-19? We'll take a minute if you can, just in the chat. Good qualities, good aspects of COVID-19 and its impact on education, and the bad qualities. Okay, good. Everyone uses video, very comfortable. I like these. I love the focus on online, but as Robin Alexander said, student life challenges certainly were brought to the forefront as a result of professors needing to understand what their students were going through. Yeah, to Lee's point, there was a traumatization impact on all of this. So you can see all of these, I think, disruptors have had a very, very positive impact on education. But if you break them down, some of them have also had some negative impacts on education. So the most current educational disruptor is, of course, AI. But AI has been around for a long time, right? It's relatively new as an educational disruptor, but AI in and of itself has been around for a while. So why are we in education taken by surprise by this? AI has been around. Most of us have been using Waze for a long time. Well, I would posit that it's taken us by surprise because it really never entered our world. It was part of our world, but it wasn't a core part of our world. And now, with AI taking a center stage in a lot of what we do in the education sector, it's created some angst and created some opportunities. And we'll talk about AI as we move through the slides. And we'll revisit why this is an educational disruptor, and we'll talk about how you can lead it in this space. So let's pivot, if we can, to that other part of the intersectionality about online education and what may lie ahead from an online standpoint. Then we'll give you an opportunity to share your thoughts with your colleagues in some breakout rooms about what you see as the successes coming ahead and what may be some of the pain points. So I don't know if you've been following the most recent Chloe report put out by Quality Matters and EduVentures Research. If you use that QR code there, that'll take you to the Quality Matters website, and you can download the full report there. We're going to highlight a little bit about what's in that report, and feel free to add your thoughts in the chat. So to summarize the Chloe 8, and just to let you know, Chloe 9, they're already gathering information for Chloe 9, so that'll be coming out, I would think, in the fall after all of the information is gathered. But the summary of Chloe 8, strong growth is continuing in online and hybrid learning environments. This contradicts an Inside Higher Ed article that I think was just yesterday, where there's a demonstration that online learning is slowing down. It is not slowing down at Montgomery College. We still have double-digit percentage increases this semester. So I don't know if there's a sector of the higher ed community where you see a slower growth than what has been in the past, but certainly not at my institution. Many institutions are expanding offerings to attract new students, retain current students, and add flexibility. I think that was certainly true as we left the heart of the pandemic, and that continues. Most institutions appear to be playing catch up to meet student demand. I think there's this push and pull between what students want and what educational leaders want. We have buildings that don't look good if they're sitting vacant. We have funders who say, we've poured a lot of money, public money, into these buildings. We need students in those buildings. So how do we placate all of our stakeholders and yet at the same time meet student demand? And this one surprised me. Nearly half of the institutions do not require faculty to undergo formal training to teach online. This, to me, gets at the quality assurance aspect of online learning, and I'm continue to be surprised by that. And I know a lot of the people on this call, I've worked with you in your institutions, and I know you require some sort of formal training. The length of that formal training and the depth of that formal training may vary, but there is some formal training that is required. So a couple of slides, and we're not going to go through all of these in depth. You can take a look at them in the Chloe report. But you can see this, there continues to be rising interest in online learning. This is from 21 and 22, as the Chloe report provides those lagging indicators. But you can see the growth and the interest is still there. If anything on this slide jumps out at you, I'd love to hear your comments in the slide or in the chat as we go through any of these. Feel free to comment in the chat. So this was the question asked of the chiefs of online learning. Does this surprise you? Or at your institution, are your strategic priorities consistent with the rising online demand? Or at your institutions, are you seeing where you're having to re-examine your strategic priorities in light of demand? Like to get your thoughts in the chat on that. Where do you see at your institutions the strategic priorities? Is online learning mentioned in your strategic plan? And if it's not, why not? And who's advocating for that? From a student standpoint, adding new online programs is a top priority. We know students face challenges with work, caring for families, all of those disruptors that don't allow them to come to our campus on a regular basis. But we also know that from our scheduling standpoint, we don't make it easy for all of those parents or those workers. So you see a lot of our students, certainly at Montgomery College, those students who are taking online degrees or online classes, mixing them with on-campus classes because of the schedule. So they're filling in time. They may take their online class while at the library or any of our learning centers, but it's an opportunity for them to manage their schedule in spite of the institution's attempt to manage their schedule. Maybe the classes they need are on campus are spread out by 3 hours, and they don't have the luxury of just sitting around and waiting for those 3 hours. So they take a combination of online and face-to-face classes. And then finally, this is demonstrates the proportions of full-time and part-time faculty with online teaching experience. So, you know, at the public two-year schools, 55% of the full-time faculty had online teaching experience, compared to 47% of the part-time faculty. At the public 4 years, 25% had a large proportion of online teaching experience, compared to 18% of full-time faculty at the private 4-year institutions. I'm not surprised at the private 4-year part-time faculty having such a large percentage, because I think a lot of those individuals will also teach at a public institution if given that opportunity. So we're going to head into a breakout room now, and we're going to take, about 6 minutes, if I can. And Shinta's going to set us up in the breakout rooms. And what I want you to do in these breakout rooms, again, is to look at what lies ahead for online education, knowing what you know about the Chloe report, knowing what you know about your own institution. What do you see as the successes moving forward? And what do you see as the future pain points? And so, Shinta, if you'll send individuals into those breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and I'll maybe have a couple of you report out, and we can get some comments in the chat as well.
All right, so I am creating the breakout rooms now. I will also pause the recording until we return to the main room. All right.
Thank you. Welcome back. I hope you had some robust discussion. I'd love to see in the chat you identify some of your successes moving forward from an online education, but also your pain points. But I'm going to ask a couple of you to report out if you can. And I hate to put a few of you on the spot, but I'm quite confident that you'll be able to provide some information. So Michelle Kloss, in your group, can you identify what successes you talked about that might be in the future, and what pain points you talked about?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I think that our group had an interesting mix of what I would call kind of long-term projects, or, a vision connected to online education, and then the reality of day-to-day life. So we had one individual from Harvard Community College in our group who is, immersed in an LMS migration. And of course, that is very all-consuming. But also the institution is very concerned about the accessibility of online courses and being sure that the needs of all students are met. And I can say that that's a priority at Carroll as well, and a long-term priority. That also came out for several of the individuals in our group. And then also just from the community college perspective, being able to meet the needs of the students, the learners in that community. So depending on geography, being sure that online education is ready for any needs that might emerge, whether they're, longer term like a pandemic, or shorter term like weather impact, but also looking at the needs of a particular student group. And this came up from Carla in Garrett, and wanting to meet the needs of that particular geographical region through both face-to-face instruction, but also the quality online instruction.
Okay, wonderful. Julie Curtis, if I can ask you to report out for your group, if you don't mind.
Yes, happy to. Can you hear me? Wanting to make sure.
We can, yes.
Okay, perfect. So we talked about, similarly, I think to what we just heard about online learning, with the projected growth being both an opportunity and a challenge. So how to flex to meet the growing demand, which is great to be able to offer that, but at the same time that puts stresses and strains on the organization to maintain quality and to continue to add that support where it's needed. We talked about the student demand, where students are opting for these programs often for flexibility. They see that as a number one benefit. But then along with that, there's a challenge around how do we help students bring all of themselves and get the full benefit? How are we delivering the full benefit of the quality education online, where students might be coming in saying, I just want it to be flexible, but are they coming in and expecting and getting and engaging in that level of rigor and benefit that we're looking for? And then we also discussed the kind of the opportunity, the benefit of there are great things about in person as well as online. And so how do we get better at providing hybrid opportunities that give students that choice and help them have, both just the flexibility benefit as well as that human connection benefit to be part of their education. And so how do we get better at that dimension of learning and choices in the learning experiences?
Wonderful. And great comments in the chat. I appreciate all of the discussion that you have had. So let's pivot, if we can, to this discussion on AI and its impact on education and its impact on online education. It was only 16, no, not even 14, 15 months ago that ChatGPT was released. November of last year or year before. It certainly rocked a lot of our industries. Certainly the educational landscape was changed. You may recall schools were talking about banning access. Some faculty were talking about heading back to blue books for writing assignments. You couldn't pick up the Chronicle inside higher ed or any of the mainstream media without seeing some horror story after horror story about AI and the cheating that's been going on and the disruption that it's caused. I think some of that has died down a little bit, and we're seeing more of a leveling of generative AI in the classroom. But I want you to tell me, do you use generative AI tools in your current work? Whether you're a faculty member, staff member, from a private industry? Okay, split 50-50, no. Okay. The percentage of yeses is a little higher than what the norm would be. And I'm not surprised by that, considering the nature of this presentation and the nature of the audience. But it's somewhere in the maybe 50 or 60% range where the numbers I've seen about using generative AI in your current work environment. And I also love the honesty for those who said unsure, because these tools change, they vary. We may not know what we're using or how we're using it. So ChatGPT, when it was released, just continued this astronomical, meteoric rise. 100 million users in 2 months. That outpaces every other technology that we've known. And that continues to grow. And this, you see systems like OpenAI, Bard, Claude. I mean, there are myriad opportunities now to use generative AI. And you can even create your own chat GPTs to target audiences or target information. And it's not just faculty who are using it in education. We see staff members who are using it to make their day more efficient. So they use it for scheduling, they use it for writing letters of recommendation or better preparing emails. A lot of opportunities outside of just the classroom that we see it impacting the education sector. So a few quotes, some of these you may have seen. This one from Supply Chain Today: machine intelligence is the last invention that humanity will ever need to make. I'm not suggesting that these are the be-all, end-all. You may agree, you may not agree that machine intelligence is the last invention that humanity will ever need to make. But these are the thoughts that are taking place outside of our classrooms. This one from Education Week: we believe that AI has the potential to change some of the ways educators teach and students learn. I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I think where there may be some conversation is, does it impact and change the way students critically think? And again, that's a great conversation to be had at another time. ChatGPT will be brutal in classrooms where writing is assigned rather than taught. And we see this quite a bit. And I think that is borne out by this next slide. The survey of 1,004-year students early last year: how often do you use ChatGPT to help you complete written assignments? There's prolific use. The amount of time varies, but there's prolific use in the use of this tool. I was having a conversation over winter break with my oldest granddaughter who goes to Temple, and we were talking about ChatGPT. And she said, absolutely, she uses it. She'd be foolish not to. She said she doesn't use it to submit the entire assignment, but she uses it as an idea generator. And so we had a great conversation about how she's using it and how her faculty are encouraging the use of ChatGPT. But all of this makes it very difficult to lead, I think. You have this crossroads of digital learning, the disruptors, and AI. And you see AI infused now in the learning management systems. I've had great conversations over the past several months with Hugh McGuire and Julie Curtis and the team from Pressbooks about how they're looking at expanding the use of generative AI in Pressbooks. These are all very exciting opportunities, and I look forward to what lies ahead in this space. But it does make leadership hard. As educational leaders, we have to balance the student use with the faculty use. Does it make sense to limit student use when those same AI skills are so heavily sought in the marketplace? How do you tell a student in one class, well, you can't use it, but in their degree, they're expected to know how to use it when they graduate? What's the difference between a faculty using it to create presentations and content for which they're being paid and students doing the same for which they're getting a grade? Is there a difference? These are hard questions, and I am not going to suggest that these are yes or no questions. There's a lot of gray area in these. So how is you as a leader, how's we as leaders, how do we lead in this space when it's so difficult? And I'm going to take us to this book, and I know Shinta has been a big fan of this book, and I too really enjoyed what this book has been able to offer. It's called The Prepared Leader, and it talks about emerging from a crisis and being more resilient. And for purposes of this discussion, I'm going to suggest that I'm going to change the subtitle a little bit from crisis to disruption, because I think education, while it may have some crises, we see more disruptions than pure crises. And I think as we go through a quick summary of this book, you'll get a sense of how the two can be connected. So in the book, James and Wooten look at 5 phases of a crisis or disruption: early warning, signal detection, preparation and prevention, damage containment, recovery, learning, and reflection. But then they also take a look at 9 supporting skills and how those supporting skills impact those different phases of a disruption. So if we can go through these briefly, sense making simply means taking a lot of information and making meaningful decisions and actions from that. Perspective taking, always beneficial to incorporate other viewpoints to see the big picture. When we look at the COVID-19 disruption, you saw a number of our institutions just meeting on a regular basis to get as many different viewpoints as possible. You didn't see one person making all the decisions. From a preparation and prevention phase, we look at influence. People need to know that as a leader, they can trust you. You have to be reassuring. You do have influence over the way individuals handle these disruptions. As a leader, you have to be able to provide organizational agility. Leaders oftentimes, I think, try to stay out of the weeds and look at the big picture. And I think there are opportunities to lead in the weeds while looking at the big picture. But when you delegate with certainty. When you're looking at creativity, recognize your vulnerabilities as an organization, as a department, as a division, and plan for any contingencies that you can think of. When you look at the damage containment, you're looking at communicating effectively and risk-taking. You want to demonstrate empathy, transparency, and again, trust. But at the same time, you don't want to head into a bubble and not take risks. You want to act urgently, you want to act decisively, but also understand that mistakes are going to happen. When you look back at all of those disruptors that we identified earlier, leaders acted urgently, they acted decisively, but mistakes happen, failures occurred. And I love the book Joy by Richard Sheridan. I would encourage you to take a look at that as another leadership book, Joy by Richard Sheridan. And he talks in his book about failing faster. And he says, the quicker you implement something, the quicker you'll identify what's not working, and the quicker you can rectify that and move on. So I love that, fail faster. And then under the recovery phase of disruption, you want to promote resilience, give your people opportunities to grow and learn. We saw that a lot during the pandemic. We're seeing that a lot in the AI disruption space. And then finally, with the individual and systemic learning, learn from your mistakes, learn from the current disruptions so that you're less vulnerable next time. Those schools that had training in place for their faculty to teach in a digital environment already had the components in place during COVID. They simply had to ramp up, scale that up. But really good message here, I think, to help us as educational leaders prepare for those disruptions that already exist, but also those disruptions that we cannot yet anticipate. In the book, The Prepared Leader, the authors talk a lot about Adam Silver, the commissioner of the National Basketball Association, and how during COVID, he made the decision to bring everyone into a bubble. And so all the teams were playing in this bubble to prevent the spread of the virus. And certainly it helped the brand of the NBA, but more importantly, what it did was create an opportunity for folks to continue to earn a paycheck. And so that's where that empathy, that transparency comes into play. So if we take a look back at these 10 educational disruptors, and as I begin to wrap up, I want you to take a look at these again, because you'll see several of them continue to be disruptors in our educational landscape. These are 4 that I identified, and I think if you go back, you could argue that they all continue to be disruptors. But I think Title IX, distance learning, online degrees, the student loan crisis, and COVID continue to be disruptors. And now you add AI into that mix. This is not a bad thing. I think disruption will result in innovation and growth. We're seeing that in the AI landscape, tremendous innovation taking place. And for me, this all creates a great deal of excitement about where we're heading for education. So a few parting quotes. Let you read those, and then I will entertain any questions, and I'll stop share. And Shinta, what do you have?
This has been fantastic. Mike, thank you so much for the wealth of information. In fact, we do have a question in the chat. This is from Julie Porosky Hamlin, and she is asking, so generative AI has swept through all sectors of human life more quickly and thoroughly than, say, MOOCs, which was another disruptor of the recent past. Mike, do you think some leaders feel on the back foot about just mastering the basics of generative AI enough so to be able to lead?
Julie, that's a great question, and thank you for that. And I do think there's this hesitancy for people to get out in front of generative AI and the whole AI discussion, because they're not comfortable using the tools. And so how do you lead in this space if you're not using the tools in the space? And I do think that is a restraint for so many of our leaders. And I would just encourage people to get out there and play as an educational leader, get out there and play with the tools that are available.
Great, thank you, Mike. And feel free to include your question in the chat. We do have time for a couple more, or if you would like to unmute, go right ahead.
And Shinta, I'm happy to stay on past the 11 o'clock deadline for those who want to continue to have that conversation.
We appreciate that so much for your time, Mike. I do have a question for you. And a couple of slides ago, you had talked about or presented some data on institutional support. You had asked us, is online education in your strategic plan? So what role do you think as leaders in online education and in higher education, what kind of collaboration do you think is most fruitful that will help positively shape digital landscapes and online education? What could that collaboration look like?
Well, I think it takes the form of a couple of areas. I think it's helpful if you work across sectors within your own institution, right? So I think it's helpful if those of us who are in academic affairs to work with student affairs and to work with marketing and recruitment, so that when we get to the table, we're able to provide a holistic approach to online learning, digital learning. I think where we have failed in the past as a sector is that we segment ourselves. So we look at it from an online degree standpoint, but how do we provide those academic support services that are necessary? The libraries play an important role in this space. The learning centers play an important role in this space. But at the same time, providing this sense of belonging that all of our institutions are focusing on requires input from student affairs and student life. So I think you have to work across sectors internally, but then I think you can really collaborate externally and work across institutions. And I think there's some great opportunities there, and we're seeing that through consortia like Maryland Online and the seat sharing, and you see that throughout a number of different institutional partnerships.
Great, thank you. Are there questions from the audience? Yes, Michelle.
Just a quick question about whether, or Mike, maybe how you position kind of the growing interest in shorter term digital credentials in kind of operating as a disruptor or not?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think you do see that as a disruptor, and you start to see more and more states place lesser value on a 4-year degree, right? So here in Maryland, we've seen that a number of states are moving in that direction where they say, okay, a 4-year degree is not required, but what might be required is that credential. And so I do think that is going to be a disruptor, because it places that what is the value of higher education discussion back on the table. So absolutely, I see that moving forward. Great question. Thank you, Michelle.
Great question, Michelle. Thank you. And Mike, there's another question in the chat for you from Christopher Murtaugh. One of the best parts of my university experience was the social connections with friends, peers, colleagues, many that have lasted until now. My son's first year of college was mid-COVID, which meant it was all online other than his labs. It was a horrible experience for him. I think this is an area that is begging for attention. So how do we build these social connections in an online environment?
Well, a great question, Christopher. And we've seen that quite a bit from those students who started in mid-COVID. This is really where that collaboration with student affairs comes in. I think, we know student affairs personnel have the ability to move to an online environment because they had to do it. They were forced to do it. Where I hope that our institutions have not taken a backslide is now that requirement is no longer there. The focus on having those virtual clubs, those virtual meet and greets, all of those things that we as undergrads valued aren't necessary anymore. And I would suggest that they're even more necessary now, because we know that students from an academic standpoint valued their online learning experience. But we also know that there's more to being a traditional age student, whether it's at a 4-year school or at a community college, than just taking classes. There is that social interaction piece. I think the other thing that some schools have done is taken these opportunities into the community. So you have pockets of online students in different communities. Don't force them to come to campus. You take your clubs to them so that they can meet at a coffee shop, and there's some structure there.
Thank you, Mike. Great question, Christopher. Any other questions from the audience?
I do want to make a comment on Julie Curtis's chat about the invitation to play, and that's what students are doing. And it is absolutely true with generative AI. Students are going in there, they are just learning all they can about these tools. And despite all of the training that we as educators can provide to our teams, students are seemingly one step ahead of us. And that's because they're finding ways to make these tools do what they want to do, and we're playing catch up all the time. We see it with so many areas. So get in there and just play around. you're not going to break anything. I've yet to see anyone who plays in generative AI bring down ChatGPT or Bard or Claude. Those systems are still running.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mike and Julie. Leaders are doing it too, and they can do it, and it is a lot of fun to play. All right, other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Mike. This has been just a phenomenal webinar with such insightful information that you have shared with us. And I think you can tell from the chat just how engaged and really pleased everybody is here. So we really appreciate your time. I also want to share on the screen the certificate of attendance for any of you who may want it to show to your institution that you participate in this MOLLI webinar. I also put in the chat both the survey that we would love your feedback. So please just take a few minutes to fill that out before the end of the week if you can. And then I also included in the chat the MOLLI website that includes information on all of our upcoming webinars and workshops with the registration links. So we hope to see you all there. And again, thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for being here.